giving a robot the appearance of a human. Several steps are needed. The first step is to tear off the original face of the robot. Step 2. The robot is shocked by its ugly appearance. Step 3. Apply a layer of silicone skin to the robot. Then give him a hair transplant. Finally, open the back. Connect his skin to the neurosensory system. And so Andrew the robot. Finally, he has the appearance of a human. Andrew had always dreamed to become a real human. And the reason for that began decades ago. At that time, he was a household robot. He had just entered the family's home. The name Andrew was given to him by the man, Neal. For some reason, Andrew seemed different from the other robots. One day, while cleaning, he saw a spider. He carefully released the spider onto a flower. It seemed to him that life was a sacred thing. Neal's eldest daughter, however, always hated Andrew. This night, she ordered Andrew to jump out of the window. Andrew didn't hesitate. Immediately rolled over and leapt down. The fall made his body feel like a stroke.
Sorry for the inconvenience. I made one big mistake.
Neal asks him what happened. Andrew chose to remain silent to protect his eldest daughter, but Neal still guessed that this must be the work of the rebellious eldest daughter. So he said to his two daughters in all seriousness, "Tell them to treat Andrew as family from now on." Luckily, Andrew was able to repair himself. Soon he was back to normal. One day Andrew accompanied the two girls on a trip. Lovely Annie gave Andrew his crystal horse for Andrew to admire. However, Andrew couldn't hold on to it. The crystal horse was broken to pieces. This made Annie very sad. Andrew saw a piece of wood next to him. He had an idea in his mind. When he got home, he started reading books on woodworking. That night, he carved an exquisite wooden horse. He gave it to Annie. Annie was overjoyed. Looking at the wooden horse, which had been carved to life, Neal began to realize that Andrew seemed different from other robots because the shape of the wooden horse, Andrew hadn't copied it. He created it himself. And that night, Neal even found Andrew had somehow repaired the phonograph that had been broken for 800 years, and he was now immersed in the world of music. This made Neal even more amazed. The next day, Neal took Andrew to the robotics company. He wanted to know if the other robots had the same performance as Andrew, but the product manager was quick to deny it. He said Andrew must be malfunctioning somewhere because Andrew's humanity, in his eyes, it was an uncontrollable safety hazard. If word got out, it would probably affect the sales of the robot. So he wanted to recycle Andrew and destroy him. He asked Neal how much he wanted to give Andrew to them. This comment made Neal angry. All he said was that personality is priceless. You can't take him away. Now that he was sure that Andrew was indeed a different kind of robot, Neal decided to stop making him do only chores every day because he felt it was his duty to help Andrew reach his potential. Every day after that, Andrew would take Annie outside to collect wood, the rotten wood. After he carved it, he would turn them into all sorts of beautiful works of art. Neal also began to teach him all kinds of human knowledge, including the wonderful process of life's birth. This made Andrew not only fascinated. Andrew saw Neal's wife. He was so amused by her that she couldn't stop laughing. He wondered how Neal could do it. Neal told him it was called humor. Then he began to teach Andrew all kinds of jokes. Andrew was a fast learner. The jokes he made up, he always makes everyone stop laughing. And in this family, Andrew's favorite person was Annie. Annie also liked to be with Andre. The two of them would often sit together and play the piano. Time just slipped through their fingers. In the blink of an eye, that little girl had become a big girl. When the song was over, Annie gave Andrew a kiss on the cheek before she left, and Andrew used an upbeat piece of music, expressing his feelings at the moment. At this time, Annie's feelings for Andrew, Neal saw it in his eyes. He advised Annie not to invest too much in Andrew. After all, Andrew is just a robot. This made Andrew, who overheard the conversation, a little disappointed. Soon after, Annie told Andrew that her boyfriend had proposed to her, but she didn't know whether to say yes or not because she always had a friend in her heart, a friend who was sweet and funny. With her, it always made her forget about her boyfriend. Andrew said, "Why don't you marry that friend?" Annie said it was impossible between them. And then Annie looked at Andrew with a hesitant look, and the mute Andrew couldn't understand what she was saying. Finally, Annie just said that she would marry her boyfriend. Soon Annie's wedding took place as scheduled. Annie looked very beautiful in her wedding dress. Watching Annie slowly walk out of the church, Andrew was disappointed. It seemed that he had lost something very important in his heart. Also sad was Neal, with his daughters leaving one after another. He looked much older. Rue was the first time that Andrew felt that parting can be so sad. Andrew told Neal that he would always be there for him. That was a comfort to Neal. Soon 12 years had passed. The clothes on Andrew's body were a good indication of how he had changed. He was becoming more and more human because he had read a lot of books over the years. He was always learning and growing. After studying the history of mankind, he found that humans had started countless wars, all for one purpose only, that is freedom. Since freedom is so important, then it must be worth having. So this night, Andrew gave Neal the money he had made. He gave Neal the money he had made over the years. He wanted to trade it for his freedom, but Neal had already thought of him as family. He didn't want Andrew to leave. But the next morning, Neal returned the check to Andrew. He still chose to respect Andrew's wishes. He gave him his freedom, but he didn't allow Andrew to live in the neighborhood because he knew that Andrew would still come to take care of him from time to time. He wanted Andrew to be able to really feel the freedom completely. And for Andrew, Neal and his family will always be his family. After leaving, Andrew built a house on a beach. From then on, this was his home. One day, 16 years later, Annie suddenly came to the house because Neal, who was on his deathbed, he wanted to see Andrew one last time. Neal said he was happy that Andrew was free and thanked Andrew for everything he had done for them. Then Neal held Andrew's hand. He died peacefully. This made Andrew realize that all these people around him would eventually pass away. After all, humans don't have endless time like he does. So he decided to find a female robot like him to spend the rest of their lives together. He believed there must be another robot in his model that was as special as he was. But he searched for 10 years but couldn't find one. One day a dancing female robot caught his eye. He followed the female robot to a robot repair shop, but the suspect found out only after contact. This female robot only installed a personalized chip to look different, and this chip was invented by this man named Jack. Not only that, Jack also studied how to make robots have the same appearance as humans. Unfortunately, no one was willing to fund his research. Andrew immediately said he was willing to fund him. Soon Jack began to give Andrew an upgrade to his appearance. When Andrew looked at his new self in the mirror, he felt the urge to cry. He went home immediately. He wanted to tell Annie the good news, but Annie said she didn't know him at all. And Andrew found that Annie had actually become younger than ever. Just then the real Annie came over. She had wrinkles all over her face. It turned out that the girl who looked exactly like Annie was Annie's granddaughter, Portia. Soon after, Annie's life came to an end. Before saying goodbye, Andrew looked at the wooden horse he was holding in his hand. At this moment Andrew realized that the friend Annie said that year was himself. Annie left this world with this regret. Portia could not help but cry, but Andrew was obviously very sad, but he couldn't let out his tears. Seeing the people he cared about leaving one by one, he didn't want to go on like this. He wanted to become a real human too. He downloaded all the medical books to his memory bank and he drew up all the drawings of the organs. Then together with Jack began to make these artificial organs. And during this time, Andrew and Portia were very happy together. The relationship between them became closer and closer. Portia was always happy with Andrew, but history is strikingly similar. Portia told her one day that she couldn't give her feelings to a robot. Andrew was very sad, but the good news is that all the artificial organs are finally ready. Andrew finally had a human body. He immediately found Portia. Excitedly, he asked Portia to poke him in the eye. The pain in his eyes made Andrew happy. Then he gave Portia a passionate kiss. This kiss made Portia's heart flutter like a deer in the headlights. She realized that she was already in love with Andrew, but she was about to get engaged to her boyfriend. When Andrew heard about it, he just said his blessing. Looking at Andrew's mute face, Portia was angry. She said to Andrew that if you want to fight for something, you have to take risks and make mistakes. Don't continue to follow the robot's reason and logic. You should listen to your heart. Andrew didn't understand at that time what was going on inside of him. He just left in silence. Portia's face was full of disappointment and loss. But on the day of Portia's engagement, Andrew, who was hiding, looked at Portia's boyfriend. His eyes were full of jealousy. Now he realized how much he loved Portia, but Portia was already engaged to someone else. He felt he didn't have a chance, and that night Jack said he had a new invention. Not only could Andrew have all the sensations of a human body, and even make him a real man. Here's what Andrew said when he heard it.
I've always been fascinated by that. Well, I mean, curious.
After becoming a real man, Andrew's mind had changed too. He longed to experience that wonder with Portia. He could no longer accept Portia as someone else's woman. Under Andrew's strong attack, Portia soon became his captive. From then on, they lived happily ever after. But Portia still had her worries. After all, human society would not accept them as a couple because Andrew's identity is still a robot. So Andrew asked the World Council to become a human. Although Andrew's body and mind are no different from those of humans, but because he had an immortal lifespan, eventually the request was rejected. So after a few more decades, Portia was already 75 years old, although Andrew had a way to keep her alive. But Portia did not want to do that because she felt that human beings should follow the natural law of life, sickness and death. And if there was no Portia, Andrew would not be able to find the meaning of his existence. So he found Jack, who had white hair. He performed a blood exchange operation on him. After the exchange of human blood, Andrew will no longer have an endless life. A few decades later, Andrew came to the end of his life together with Portia. On the day Andrew turned 200 years old, the World Council finally recognized him as a human and also recognized his marriage with Portia. But Andrew did not have time to see the news with his own eyes. He had already passed away. Perhaps she was afraid that Andrew would feel alone. Portia asked the nursemaid to turn off the life support machine, and then she went to heaven with Andrew.